We open up in the Swiss Alps, and a girl is making her way through the woods with a basket, and she searches until she finds a mushroom, and she collects it. She heads back to her mother, and she asks her about the mushroom. Her mom tells her that the mushroom is poisonous, and she sends her back into the woods to find the white mushrooms. Of course, the bad ones are beautiful. When the girl goes back to the woods, a random boy shows her the way to the mushrooms by reflecting light onto a spot on the ground. As the girl picks mushrooms, she finds a decomposed hand, and soon investigators arrive to check the scene. When the girl identifies the boy she saw, the cop tells her that's impossible because the boy went missing in the 70s. After the mother hears this, she remembers another officer that didn't believe in ghosts in the woods. We go back to the 70s, and we see a father running through the village with a girl. He's a police officer, and he follows her to the church where a group of villagers are gathered. Once he finds that they're gathered around a priest that hung himself with a church bell rope, he has someone go get Dr. Zing. I'll never understand why people are always telling someone to hurry and get the doctor. Trust me, the priest, he ain't going nowhere. He's gonna be hanging out there, I promise. When Dr. Zing gets there, he inspects the body, and he rules it as a suicide. After that, the remaining priest tries to break the news to the rest of the townsfolk. He tells them that the devil is present. Soon after, the villagers gather for a funeral in the woods. But someone seems to be watching them from the tree line. When they make it back to the town, the girl grabs the officer Royce, and she shows him that they're being followed. When they turn, they find a woman draped in a sheet. Just as she collapses, Royce carries her and he calls out for the doctor. He takes her to the police station and she comes to. He tries to check on her, but she kisses him aggressively just as Dr. Zing walks in. After a quick examination, Dr. Zing manages to figure out that the girl has amnesia. How did he get to that conclusion? He shined a bright light in her eyes and that made her upset, and that's essentially the end of his checkup. Yeah, I'd hate that light in my eyes too. Why didn't anyone tell me I had amnesia? Maybe I forgot that too. Dr. Zing believes that she should be taken to the asylum, but Royce states that he thinks something else is wrong. Meanwhile, at the pub, Tones tells the others that he thinks he saw a woman 3 days ago, but he also thinks that it could have been a monk. Just then, Royce walks in with the woman, and he asks the shopkeepers if they have a free room. The keeper's wife takes her to a back room where she closes the door, and she talks to Royce about how this is a bad idea. She tells him that she found a carved goat that the woman dropped before, and she wants him to go to her brother's cabin in the woods to make sure everyone's okay there. Finally, they go back in, and they give the girl clothes. When Royce goes to leave her the girl, he tries to explain to everyone that there's no evidence that this girl is a murderer. You gotta love those towns where the townsfolk are ready to murder with just the slightest assumption. The girl literally just showed up at the wrong time, and they're ready to pin the priest's death on her. After listening to the townsfolk, Royce decides that it's better to lock the girl up until he returns from Mount Thistle. Royce heads up to a sort of cabin that seems to be abandoned, and he walks right in. After finding the house empty, he goes outside to call for Erwin. As he goes to leave, a hand smacks the glass of the house, but Royce can't see it. When Royce gets back to the station, the priest is inside waiting to cast the devil out of the girl, but Royce escorts the priest out and goes to comfort the girl. Royce takes the girl to his place and she starts to scribble a symbol on a piece of paper. When she goes to kiss him, he hastily takes her to the bed for her to get some rest. Royce gets credit for keeping his composure. This woman's literally throwing herself on him. But he manages to take her to a bed and doesn't do anything with her. Royce is that good guy type, the perfect town sheriff. The next morning, Martin arrives on a bus and he goes to meet Mr. Mans. The two of them hike up the mountain, and we find out that Martin left the city due to his wife leaving him. Suddenly, Albert shines a light in their eyes, just like he did the little girl in the present, and Mr. Mans explains that he's mute. Back in town, Royce wakes up to the girl serving him, and she makes it clear that she wants to be with him. If only it was that easy in real life. Once you reach a certain age, you just walk into the woods until your soulmate wanders out without saying a sound. Yeah, definitely a fairy tale. Back up on Mount Thistle, Mr. Mans explains how Albert became a mute after being the sole survivor of an avalanche a decade ago. Then Albert barges in to warn Mr. Mans about a danger. Mr. Mans grabs his gun and runs outside to shoot. It turns out that a lynx had gotten a hold of one of the goats, and Martin has to put the goat out of its misery. This mountain family really couldn't put the goat out of its misery. It had to be the city boy. On the other hand, Mr. Mans has an illegal absinthe mill in one of his sheds. That's kind of awesome. Back in town, Royce goes through some missing persons reports, and he finds that the girl is actually a missing person from the 50s. Royce takes her to the mayor for him to watch her, and he heads out to question a retired investigator. They talk about a fire in the valley that killed 3 herdsmen, and the girl is the prime suspect that was never found. Back at the mayor's house, the priest shows up and almost kills the girl, but the mayor saves her before she runs off. She runs to the inn where she asks for food, but after seeing a cross on the bread, she seems to attack the innkeeper woman. Meanwhile, Albert is drunk, and we finally get some connections. They're so drunk that they need a woman, so Mr. Mans has Albert make Martin a Senin Tunchi, because this can only end well. When Royce returns, he finds that the mayor and Dr. Zing are at the inn, and the girl's attack caused the death of Therez's baby. After Royce leaves, we go back to the mountain where the three men are creating the Senin Tunchi. The being is created, and we see that the girl is actually the Senin Tunchi. Okay, for the sake of everyone involved, I'm going to nickname Senin Tunchi. From now on, she'll be known as Senin. That is a tongue twister of a name. When Albert gets a hold of her, he sees Senin, and he tosses the ragdoll version into the other room. Back in town, the townsfolk gather for a funeral for the unborn baby, and the priest addresses everyone while he mentions that this isn't the first time that Senin is killed. He shows a newspaper from the 50s to the entire congregation, and he tells Royce that he's not even safe from her powers. The next morning, Albert wakes up to find Senin lurking around, and he tries to wake up Mr. Mans, who in turn wakes up Martin. When they find Senin, they're amazed to see that she's real. Martin pulls Mr. Mans aside, and Mans tells him that in folklore, Senin actually is supposed to kill them as revenge for what they do to her. That's appropriate. Is this gonna turn into a I Spit on Your Grave the Alps edition? Mans immediately grabs his coat and leaves the house, but Albert's over here feeding Senin like a pet cat. This is one of those stories where you know how things are going to end up, but you just enjoy the ride. Everyone goes outside, and Martin helps Mans skin a goat while they discuss what to do with Senin. When Mans takes Senin back inside, he gets a little bit close and personal with her, and Albert spies on them through the cracks in the wall. Mans shows Senin the magic of fire on the stove, but after she burns herself, things get even more intense. It was literally about 4 pumps. I want to say that the scene was cut short for ratings or pacing, but I don't think there was any extra footage to cut. Back in town, Royce goes to call the inspector, but he finds out that he died from a heart attack. Then the mailman comes in, and he hands Royce a wanted poster for Martin that says he murdered a woman in his last town. Back in the mountain, Mans tells Martin that Senin doesn't want to go anymore, but Martin isn't going to get in trouble for Senin. He waits for Mans to walk away, and he whisks her away in the woods. Once Mans finds out what Martin's done, he has Albert get his gun. Martin takes Senin to the edge of the mountain to show her the path, but she bolts in a different direction. Martin follows after her, and he covers her mouth as Mans walks by. My god, do none of the men in this movie have any self-control? According to this movie, you have to be a mute to keep yourself from forcing yourself on a woman. Martin takes her back to the cabin where Albert is keeping watch, and he tosses her in the house. When he goes to talk to Albert, Albert accidentally shoots the gun, and this draws Mans back. Martin takes the gun from Albert, and he gives Mans quite a scare as they both admit that they had their way with her. Martin tells her that she's leaving in the morning, and the 4 of them have a fun night around a fire. It turns out that this wasn't Mans' first time with a woman, but the love of his life ended up with Albert's mother instead. This conversation doesn't last very long because he goes to make Albert get it on with Senin, but that doesn't last long either since Albert finishes before he even undoes his belt. This movie definitely sets weird expectations for the guys in the Alps. After Albert runs away, the 2 men have their way with Senin inside, and they pass out immediately afterwards. Senin stays awake and grabs a knife, then we see her leave the cabin. And we cut to the town below as Royce is waken up by an obnoxious knocking. He finds Senin waiting outside, and he promises to take her to safety. They quickly get dressed, and Royce rushes her through town until they get to the police station. There, he hides her in the back seat, and they leave town. Just as they get to the tunnel, a truck turns on its lights, and Royce crashes his car into an adjacent fence. The townsfolk leave Royce bloodied on the ground, and they leave to find Senin. In the morning, Albert wakes up the 2 other men because he finds a bloodied knife elsewhere. And he leads them to a barn where they find that all of the goats have been mutilated. Mans leaves with Albert to find Senin, but Martin hears a sound in the back of the barn. When he investigates, he finds Senin hiding in the loft, and he tries to help Senin by locking her in the house while he handles Mans. Martin goes to tell Mans that Senin ran off in the hillside, and Mans tells Albert and Martin to bury the goats. Back in town, Royce stumbles home and grabs his backup gun. Royce follows some townspeople into the church, and he finds a secret compartment hidden in a closet. Once inside, he finds even more secrets. While in the secret chamber, he finds what looks to be a prison cell where a doll is sitting on the bed. Back up on the hill, Martin seems to be dealing with an infection from a bite Senin gave him the night they had her. Mans tries to take him to the village, but Martin tells him that he's wanted for killing his girlfriend. I feel like that's the least of your worries at this point. This rabid Senin bit you and you have blood poisoning apparently. They always warn you that once the effects kick in, it's too late for you. Mans helps Martin get into bed, and he sends Albert to get some absinthe. Albert goes to the storehouse that Senin is locked in, and she knocks him out with a bottle of absinthe. When Mans goes to find Albert, he finds Senin instead, and he locks her back in the storehouse. Then he douses the building with alcohol before setting it on fire. but Senin escapes out of the roof. By the time Albert comes to, he's engulfed in flames and barges out of the building. Mans manages to put the flames out, but after he brings Albert to the house, it turns out to be too late. Albert says one word, "Papa," then he passes. Mans spots Senin watching from outside, and he runs out and knocks her out with a stool. He then carries her back in the house. Back in the village, Roish goes to confession, and he arrests the priest for murder. After Roish gets the priest back to the police station, he points out that he knows he got the woman that's in the picture pregnant back in the 50s. So Senin is actually his daughter that he kept secret under the church. Even after Roish explains everything to the priest still tells him that Senin isn't human. Roish heads up to the mountain to find Senin, but she's busy being trapped in Mans' cabin. Mans tries to kill Senin with a crucifix, but it just seems to be making her frustrated. Suddenly, Martin stumbles out and grabs a gun. He commands Mans to set her free, but he attacks him instead. Just as Roish barges into the cabin, things go quiet. He finds the screwdriver that Mans had thrown, but apparently these things are going on at different times. Back in the past, Senin is cut free, and she ends up killing Mans with a knife. In the present, Roish finds Senin carrying a pail into the room, and they embrace. She makes him coffee like Mans taught her, and things seem right for the moment. When we flash back to see what happened, we see that she let Martin die naturally from the blood poisoning while she sewed the other two up like straw scarecrows. After Roish sees this, he gets sick and shoos her away from him. After he composes himself, he chases after her, and he follows her off the side of the cliff. He manages to catch a branch before he falls, though. When he makes his way to the bottom of the cliff, he finds multiple bodies that have been skinned, and he shoots himself for being so stupid. This movie's like a Billy Mays commercial on acid, but wait, there's more! When we finally get back to the present, we see that the woman is finishing up her story with the investigators, and the girl says that she sees Senin. When the investigators look, they find Senin's decomposed body stuck in a crevice in the cliff. Then the credits roll. What did I just watch? This is probably one of the most convoluted, time-jumping folklore that isn't really folklore films that I've done in quite some time. It definitely kept me watching though, so give it a shot. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.